All right, welcome everyone. My name is Catherine Cha. I'm the Senior Manager of Communications and Knowledge Transfer for LEAP. It's a NSF-funded science and technology center. LEAP stands for Learning the Earth with Artificial Intelligence and Physics. And a special welcome to our CS3 students and our colleagues from down the hall. It's my pleasure to introduce today our speaker, Chad Small. He's returning, so thank you again for coming back to LEAP. Chad Hall is Chad Small. What did I say, Chad Hall? I'm sorry, Chad Small. His name is Chad Small. He is a PhD student in atmospheric sciences at the University of Washington. He's researching how multi-scale phenomena can interact to intensify rainfall and then, of course, potential flooding. He has received the National Defense Science and Engineering Graduate Fellowship. And you're also an environmental justice reporter and science writer. And so we're especially happy to have him here with so many students in the room and future early career and senior career scientists in the room to lead us through a science communications workshop. So thank you, Chad, and enjoy.
You guys can hear me, right? Awesome. All right. Thanks for having me here today. I'm really happy to be here. So today, my workshop is titled The Art and Science of Science Communication for Earth Scientists. I know many people here are in earth science, but this should be a little transferable even if you're not specifically in that field. So let me give us a little bit of a lay of the land of how we're going to operate through this workshop today. There we go. So I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about myself. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about like why science is important, why science communication matters, what the recipe for good science communication is. We're going to do one activity called Pop Talks, which you'll see in a little bit. We're talking about amplifying your work. Then we're going to talk about pitching your own research if you want to like communicate it more broadly to a general audience. We're going to talk about being a media source. And then also I'll share with you some resources to help you guys out if you want to do more science communication work in the future. The goal for today isn't to make you guys like instantly like the best science communicators out there, but more give you an idea of how to think about it if you do want to pursue it more thoroughly. So about me, like Catherine said, I'm a rising 30-year PhD student in atmospheric and climate science at the University of Washington. Uh, yeah, so I study rainfall extremes and flood potential in lowland areas. I'm also from New York City, so very happy to be home for a little bit. And yeah, so I've been working as a science writer and journalist since about 2019. A little less now since grad school was time consuming, but you know, we do our best to do things that we care about when we have time to do it. So now I'm gonna go more into like my journey. I think my journey like to here kind of informs how I think about science communication and also think about research. So in 2016, I graduated with a degree in environmental engineering. And then I spent like 2 years working as an engineer and then recognized that that necessarily wasn't for me. So I was a little bit lost about what I wanted to do next. But then, you know, journeys are always a good thing. So in the interim, I started doing different things. I started writing a little bit about the environment. And for me, it's really helpful. So the first thing I wrote for was for Blavity. Blavity is a online magazine that often deals with Black culture topics, but they needed an environmental reporter. And I was like, well, I think I can write and I think I know the space. So, but for me, it's really important to think about how can you serve people who don't know the science in a way that you might. So I wrote this article in 2019 looking at this community in Canarsie in Brooklyn and how they're dealing with flood and post-Sandy recovery. So I know this community really well because like the people who live there are from the Caribbean. My family's from the Caribbean too. So for me, it was an idea of how can I help this community doing things that I might know that like get them get involved with their own science outreach work. But then in that space, I started thinking more about how do you use what you know, right? So then after that, I started like dealing like, more with like decarbonization research. Like I'm an engineer for a little bit, so I was like, okay, how can I use what I know there to like write about how we can decarbonize the environment, for example, to help with emissions. But when I was doing this work, I kind of felt like I didn't know enough to keep doing it well. So I was like, I think I'm gonna go grad school. So what I did next is I like enrolled at City College of New York for my master's in Earth Atmospheric Science, just to get an idea of what like science is for environmental science and earth science and stuff like that. I also was thinking, do I want to do a PhD or not? And I wasn't sure. Spoiler alert, I did do the PhD or like I'm doing it right now. So really did enjoy science. So like while I was there, I was learning more about how atmospheric science functions, how it can be useful, how it can be helpful. But I also like got a little bit more on the policy side too. So if you think about science journalism as a way to communicate science policies, how you integrate the work you do at levels that can help people like more directly. So when I was in grad school at City College, I was an intern at NOAA and an intern at like the House Science Committee for Science, Research, and Technology. So I was really helping work on legislation as it would help inform how we think about like legislation for science, for NOAA, NASA, those different organizations that really empower us as researchers to do work that we do. So after that, I was like, okay, I think I'm kind of ready to move on to newer things. But before that, I want to go back to writing again. So I got an internship to work at Grist for about half a year before I came to UW, where I was the data reporter. And the story I wrote at Grist is kind of a merging of science and policy. It's like, how do you think about atmospheric science, but then how does policy choices really impact that, right? So the story looks at how weather forecasting can be impacted by our choices, like in the government, for example. So this finished, and then I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to go back to school again. Um, so then I like started my PhD in 2022 at UW, but I have been when I had time still writing. So I'm also the climate fellow for the Bulletin Atomic Scientists. So I like write a couple articles a year, kind of dealing with more the climate science and the way that we think about this for saving lives, informing the public. Bulletin Atomic Scientists historically has been a nuclear risk magazine, but now they really branched more into like science risks generally, whether it be climate change, biohazards, so on and so forth. So with that, we can think about the things that we really want to work on and like how I've gotten here. But then science communication has a meaning to it. Like, why is it important? What makes it meaningful? So why does it matter? And my first thought is it raises awareness for those who aren't us. And I guess like a lot of people in here are like early career folks. So in the future, you want people to think about why the work you do matters. So here's this article from Manga Bay, India. I have this QR code here. People want to scan it to read the article. But basically, these researchers were able to use a machine learning algorithm to help predict landslide intensity with pretty good accuracy, which is really cool. And it also helped places like India, where landslides can kill a lot of people, inform policymakers how they can really use science to help folks. So this is a way that you can raise awareness about different research and different things that you do. And then beyond that, the other question is it can influence public policy, which I think I mentioned a little bit before. But there's this article from Nature Communications where different scientists who do both like earth science, like climate science research, but also do medical research, were trying to influence policy to basically save people's lives who could deal with climate impacts, whether it be flooding, whether it be heat. And they found that legislation wasn't really helping them. So they had to go through the courts to get things done to help people. So this is a way that we can really bring our science into the fore to help folks, I guess, be safe. And then the final thing on why I think science communication matters is I think it influences the next generation of scientists. So here's like a little like joke. So Mythbusters, I don't know how many people watched it growing up, but I watched it a lot. It was my favorite TV show as a kid. And for me, it's like they're not like doing studies, but they're kind of going through like scientific method, right? How you get an hypothesis, how do you test it, how do you like research an idea? And for me, it kind of is one of the reasons why I'm like here doing science today. I found it really like helpful as like a little kid thinking about how science operates. Also, to the point of this GIF, like it's one of the places where you get to see how recording your work really impacts how you think of things as a scientist. So for me, this is really helpful, and I think like the idea, like little things you do as you move through your career can really impact people come behind you who may want to then do science later on in the future. So with that, we can talk about let's talk about like how do we now we talk about like why it matters. Let's talk about how do we do it. What are the parts that are important for this? So you guys can see we have this diagram here. It's from CMBR Science Platform, which is a Portuguese science communication outlet. And they have like this nexus of ways we can think about science communication, right? Um, I'll let you guys take a look at it for a second, but I want to focus on a few parts of it right now because it's kind of going to set up what we're going to do next with our first activity. So we have this idea where we have like the proof of coffee, which is like, can you explain research in like 5 minutes to somebody who's talking to in a coffee shop, for example, right? Then science should be simple for some people, right? Like, like you might be in it and you might think it's all these deep like nuances are important. They are important, but for folks who aren't in it, they need to know like, okay, like what's going on? Why does it matter? What makes it important? To the same point, you need to be brief. Like, can you cover this work in a very brief capacity so people don't get lost or get bored? And also follow up on that, like you need to avoid jargon. Scientific jargon to us is how we communicate. It's how we know our work is correct and accurate and repeatable. But for folks who aren't in our space, jargon to them could be like a different language. And then finally, they say if you can explain it to kindergartner, then you know it really well. And I find explaining to kindergartner is a really helpful way to think about how our science could function. And I think things I've said to like 5-year-olds have been helpful for people who are also like 25 or 55. So I think it's a good way to think about how we operate in the space. So now we're gonna get into our first activity. You guys should all have a sheet and there should be number in the top. So what I want you guys to do is sort yourselves into the groups of matching numbers. I think there should be 1 through 7. So just take a second to, yeah, if you don't have one yet, find the folks who are in the same number group as you.
All right, where are my 3s at?
Wait, who's a 6? If you're a 6, we're gonna be up at this front table.
Poor guy.
You're 4. You can feel 7, actually. I'm taking your 2. Over here. 6 is over there. 7 is Anthony, what is it?
No, 2.
Thank you. Good. How are you? Everybody sound that great? But we need your name? I'm
Sixes, right?
Yeah. Are you guys all in the same program?
Yeah.
What are your names? Malika and Tyler. Okay, I'm Greta.
Tony, but. Are you?
Is everyone roughly in place?
People missing Margaret.
My horse.
Cool.
Yeah.
You know what, maybe if you join a group, you share with that's okay.
Oh, we just small.
I think so. Or this year.
You don't have one of these, right? We're fine.
Okay, guys. Is everyone kind of in place? All right, cool. So we're gonna do this activity called Pop Talks, which is something that is done at ComSciCon, which is a conference for science communication for grad students every year. So basically, I have you guys in groups right now. So you're gonna pick one person from each group and you're gonna present like your research in 30 seconds as you would to a general audience. And I'll give you a list of audiences in a second. You guys should have these like placards that say jargon are awesome. What's gonna happen is as people are talking and saying what they work on, you're gonna wave at them awesome if their stuff is jargon free or like jargon if their stuff is full of jargon. The idea is like, it's supposed to get you like kind of warmed up and thinking about how science communication functions in practice. So yeah, avoid jargon, use the handouts to do it. Cool. So, and then we have these categories of audiences here. And I have a little randomizer where you get to choose who your audience is. So I'll give you guys a second to, or like 10 seconds, 30 seconds to pick someone from each group who is willing to be brave and do this. I'll give you an example, right? So I'll show you how to talk about my research to like scientists and then talk about it to people who aren't scientists. So I study the Magellanic Oscillation, which is this phenomenon that impacts broad categories of features in the world, particularly rainfall, for atmospheric rivers over the West Coast by virtue of moisture vapor transport. If I said that to people who weren't in our field, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Or I could say, for example, I study how very moist air from very warm places makes it rain a lot in very cold places. So those are different ways you can think about this. So yeah, so with that in mind, would anyone like to volunteer? One person for each group, if anyone would like to volunteer to go first. And like truly, this is a collaborative space. The purpose of this is to make you feel comfortable doing it because this is how you start thinking about how people think about your work. Someone want to go? Come up here.
Come up there.
Come up there, yeah.
30 seconds to.
So so randomizer here.
Okay, I'm group 3. Yeah. Alrighty, so I study clouds, and specifically I study the feathery clouds that are really high up in the atmosphere. And those clouds are made out of ice. There's a lot that we don't understand about them, so we're trying to figure out how much sunlight they reflect back to space. Kindergartners are hard.
I had that one last year. Kindergartens are hard. Who'd like to go next?
I'm happy to go.
Go ahead.
It's related field.
Oh, yours.
There we go. Sure. So I'm Anthony. I'm at the Colorado School of Mines, and what I study is spatial statistics for big data. So a lot of the time when a satellite flies over the Earth, it tries to capture a measurement like temperature over some region, but they don't get all of the regions. And so in order to fill in the gaps, oh, thank you. In order to fill in the gaps, we have to use like complex machine learning methods. I knew it.
Good job. Who'd like to go next?
You go.
Awesome.
Laura.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Greta. I am working on the title of my project is parameterizing atmospheric turbulence, but that's a lot of jargon. So basically, when there are like up in the atmosphere, there's a couple different layers of where the air is, and there's this one area called the planetary boundary layer, and we don't exactly know how air moves in that area. So we're trying to find equations to figure out how we can measure the air movement.
That's on time too. 30 seconds exactly.
Okay.
36. Would like to go next?
Oh.
Ready?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Hi, my name's Sammy. I'm also a student at Columbia. And I'm also working with clouds, but specifically the problem I'm trying to solve is clouds in different circumstances can kind of take lots of different directions, and it can be really chaotic to figure out what happens. And so we're trying to see if we can use information about how like general or average clouds behave to kind of have more realistic predictions for like a specific cloud in a specific time and place.
4 people go so far. So I think you might have 3 more people who want to volunteer. Would like to go next? You want to go, Laura?
Okay, so
I'm studying like Greta, atmospheric turbulence. So that's how air moves in like the first like few meters of the atmosphere. And it's really important because if, for example, we have a car that's polluting, we want to know where those pollutants go in the atmosphere.
Who wants to go next? I think we have 2 more people who need to go if my count is correct.
Yeah, Tony.
There you go. Let me see if you got it.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Tony, and this summer I'm working on an air-sea interaction project. So it's looking at the connection between the air and the sea. And I'm using satellites to see if I can make better pictures of what's going on.
Thank you. Okay. Is there one more group, I think? If I'm not mistaken. Did anyone in the group back there go, or? Okay. I think we might be solid. Okay, I think we're good unless anyone else would like to volunteer to go. Okay, cool, awesome. That was great. So I know it's really hard and it's really scary. So with that in mind, I want you guys to take like 2 to 5 minutes to talk with your groups, and like I'm bringing this back again so we can see which parts of that are like applicable. Let's talk about what part of Pop Talks felt the hardest based on these things, and what part felt the easiest amongst your group, and then we'll share out some ideas of what people thought was difficult or what was easy. So yeah, let's take 2 minutes or so. Go for it.
It can be difficult to avoid scientific jargon when you're like
That'd be really hard. You could use so many words. I thought it was kind of nice at least breaking it down because you don't want to get too jargon on the machine learning, artificial intelligence. That's even other scientists don't have this stuff. That's sometimes probably my house, right?
So I think for me, like making sure
Reading papers, keep it brief. I think everybody knows how to think about it. For the summer that year.
or I just
A long way around all the way to that's right.
Yeah.
And then all the way back up to Astoria.
Yeah, explain that. Like, it's so hard. Like, kindergarten. For high school level. What is this?
That's not really on it.
Oh, okay.
I never want to say I like walking past that like yeah I don't want to wait.
So yeah.
That's cool.
All right, everybody, let's bring it back real quick so we kind of stay roughly on time. Cool. Did anybody want to share what their group's thoughts were? What they found hard, what they found easy? Did anyone want to share how they felt about this? Even as an observer, what you guys thought would have been difficult for you if you were to go up there. Go for it. Oh,
For the online people, right? So probably simplifying or the 5-year-old child. I mean, there's a lot of overlap between those two. Because you have to lie in order to be understandable. You have to like really cut a lot of corners. Like what I told you all is kind of a lie. I have a lot of model output from stochastic Lagrangian Monte Carlo simulations, right? But that's not awesome. That's a lot of jargon. It is awesome. So like finding the right balance of where do you simplify without getting too far from the truth of what you do. You know, I found that tricky.
I feel like to tag off of that, what most people are going to understand is your background information. Like just explaining where you are in the niche is going to be 99% of your time. Like I might be telling you about satellites and then temperature and then big data, but like the specificity of which method to use is like the interesting part for me. But at that point, like I personally think there's no avoiding jargon, or I'm just not good enough at scientific communication to dodge the jargon that deep in.
that makes a lot of sense for sure. Anybody else want to have thoughts? And to the point of jargon, we're gonna go over activity later that will help get at that exact thing. Other thoughts? Okay. Cool. So we can move on to the next part of this. So before we kind of went into, we left out part of this, and I'm gonna like hone in on these two parts right now. So we have this worldwide and educate. I'd say like worldwide, think that's like your audience, right? Are you local? Are you global? Like my research is very West Coast focused. Atmospheric rivers are West Coast things in the US, right? But someone might be thinking about, I don't know if they're doing broad, like earth interaction work, they're probably thinking basin scale stuff, right? And then the question becomes which audiences care about that, right? But then to the point of jargon, I think once you reel people in with like, oh, here's what I do background, they're gonna ask you questions, and that's educate. Then you have the part to like break in a little bit of like, here's what the jargon is, here what the thoughts are, things like that. So I think that's kind of how you kind of get at this. So I'm gonna go and show a couple examples of how this is done in ways that we might think of. So this is an abstract for a journal, not one in our space at all. I think this is biology. But I wanted to show it because most people here who are like thinking about doing science work have written an abstract, seen an abstract, they know how abstracts function, right? So, but abstracts they have like logic, they have like an order to them. So, at the beginning, you want to give someone an introduction to your field, like any scientist or any researcher should be able to like, okay, here's what's going on. I know what's happening, right? Then you like, more background information, next couple sentences of like reading this, we like get an idea of like what's going on. People who are in your field might know what that is, right? They're like, okay, like tell me how this functions, what things should I know, how do I figure out what space to be in? Then like the whole point of research is answering questions, looking at problems. So next thing you do in abstract is like, okay, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What is the unexplored space? What is this like bottleneck in this research space that we got to think about? And then, you want to tell them like what you've done. Like you're like up top first, you want to say like, we've done this thing, right? We've used these simulations, we've done this to figure out this problem. And then you want to say what the results is. You have time, they're invested, they're like, okay, what's the result? Here's how we did it. What are the things that finally want you to focus on? And then we want to put in more general context, right? Let's say you're doing, my research is atmospheric river research. The context is like often flooding impacted or even methods of how you think about flooding or rainfall, right? And at the end of it, you give the broader context. I think this study is way too in the weeds, at least from the abstract for me, but I'm not like a biologist. But the idea being is how do you really give people this framework, right? So the point of jargon, this is one way we think about communicating, but it's communicating to basically ourselves. So then the question you ask yourself is how you communicate to others, right? So here's an abstract for a journal, and here's a media pitch. So I'm gonna frame the next part in the activity and how do you like pitch your stuff to, I say media, but broadly defined, how do you get your stuff out there, right? So a media pitch, this is when I wrote for a story about atmospheric rivers and Magellanic oscillation in April. So I'll give you guys some time to read it if you want to take a look at it. I'll just talk through it a little bit. But a media pitch is the same thing. You want to get people invested and say, hey, here's why you should care. Here's what the science is. Here's how it helps people's lives, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, right? And I think the general abstract does that, but for a more like localized audience. So with that in mind, I'm going to break down a media pitch the same way we break down an abstract just now, right? So same thing. I'm at the top, I'm introducing the subject. I'm like, here is what's going on. In this case, I'm like, the MJO, manually oscillation, impacts atmospheric rivers. That's the subject right there up front. Then it's like, why is this important, right? Why is it different? In this space, a lot of researchers look at this from like El Nino space. They do other things to look at like atmospheric river intensity. MJO, I think, is often not talked about in the media. So that's something you want to think about too. Okay, now they're like, okay, I know this thing is new. I know this thing has meaning to it. And you're like, okay, here's the description. They don't know what this is, right? So now you're like, okay, here's what this thing is. Here's how it operates. Here's what makes it meaningful. But also, if you're thinking about people's memories are kind of short. So for them, it's always like, all right, why is it newsworthy? Like, what about this is like important now, right? So with this, there's like rainfall and flooding in California this past year. So that's why it's important now. And then is it unique, right? You know, what about this thing is different? What about this thing is, you know, outside of the norm of things we think about? And I know for our research, for people in our space, we think everything is unique. That's the point of research, is to find new things. We have to tell people why they should think it's unique is kind of the big question. And then like, you know, audience, who make it local or global? Who does it affect? Why is it meaningful? In this case, California farmers are really impacted by atmospheric rivers, and they should really know how to help, like what makes their lives worse given climate impacts and things like that. And then finally, like, does it make the world a better place knowing this, right? Emergency managers, community audience for this kind of work, you know, your local like community board, depending on what you're researching. People just need to know things. We do research because we think it's interesting, but also people knowing it is also interesting too. So I know that we're getting lunch right now, which is good because now is a good breaking point. So what we're gonna do is you have your worksheets, which have an activity, right? The idea is you're gonna break into your groups. Each group's gonna make like a 1 paragraph science-based pitch. What I recommend for you guys is pick one topic. Everyone does different research. I'd like pick one thing that you guys know, like one person does maybe, and then have other folks kind of be the person who's listening and writing to kind of like workshop it basically. Choose your audience, you know, like, are it policymakers? Is it local folks? Is it teachers? Is it whoever? Things to bear in mind. So what I'm gonna give you guys 10 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer, since you're eating. So like eat, talk, work, start like working through like your ideas with each other. I'll be walking around the room if you have questions. And my pitch is on the back of that second sheet. So you can use it as a way to like, if you need an example of how to do it, it's there. So if you have questions, I'll be walking around, but like go for it. Yes, I figured now's a good time to
Okay, so we studied the elderly population of New York City, specifically in Harlem, and their overall attitude towards using the sidewalks here in the area, specifically zebra crossing. I'm used to calling them. I'm used to calling them that because they operate between black and white. Oh, those black and white, sorry. Specifically crosswalks and at busy intersections.
AI and science.
Create a paragraph.
Because our study is mostly to urban planning, so they could like maybe
Three of you are doing like
have them in mind.
Color the same group. What are you doing?
It's like more like public safety.
That makes sense though, right? It's like I think it's the whole eating radio thing. Yeah. It's the same thing. I think we're finding
Yeah, you just see like.
Makes sense.
Basically, but it's so like, I think it's really just like a leading thing, obviously, but like, I think it's the same.
I would say some that maintain, and even more pervasive problems have some light cycle maybe might be a little shorter. Traffic might be too bad.
What year are you? So I'm a junior.
Or
I had to go home.
the light cycle might.
Back, so I
Might not shorter than their.
Let's talk after. You can talk, I can like sick. So yeah, they're like, this is
Yeah, so you've seen how that helps the visually impaired, and even today, most of them don't even work.
Yeah, I mean, like, here, so. Yeah,
Coming up with ideas.
it's not a big city.
For older New Yorkers.
But like, that's the one. You know what I mean? Love it. So you can hide it. So I think for me, it's like. You know what I mean? Like. Yeah, you go to the. Yeah. You get questions on what. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
It's like 130%.
Is it like a magnet, whatever, or what are those called? When it's like science based and like everything else.
Extending the life cycle
Yeah.
for pedestrians, one way might
You already have
traffic
like,
backups to.
applied to undergrads or like?
No.
So that's something to consider because we want the life cycle to accommodate an even flow of traffic, but also,
I leave that.
but also give time enough to. So you guys the light cycles there can last. Even a minute is.
Built a summer internship.
Uh,
I highly recommend, it's called LEAP, but it's called an REU, it's research and it's an undergrad, and you do it in the summer usually. Apply to it if you can, they really help you going like to grad school.
It's more like it wasn't, I've never been.
A really small school in Denver, central to Denver, called MSU Denver.
All I don't think.
There's a big national lab
Waiting in the
for
car.
weather called NCAR, and it's in Boulder, so I do a lot of stuff there, so that's why I chose MSU Denver, you know. It has no connection, it has a meteorologist. So, all I need. I would recommend it.
We don't even know what's going
It's just us. Down to two. All right.
Honestly, I don't really know my research that well.
I can do my research and then we can like write down whatever, like whatever it makes sense. I mean, I haven't done a project, so if that helps. So we're trying to do albums. I like your thing that you're doing with your group about like just where more ability is needed, right? Like that's a big thing.
If they're able to like.
It's like it's really hard, it's like not one. Is
Yeah, that do the work for you. That's the way to do it. Makes life easier.
Like an elevator lift at the station. For the ones because it's ridiculous.
Hey, if you guys haven't started writing yet, you might want to just to like get something on paper.
Basically, yeah, air sea interactions. They're using sunlight imagery. don't have a pencil or anything, so if you, that would really help. I think I have my laptop with me. I would definitely really help. Kind of within their time. Ocean. It's a lot of climate stuff, but it's more kind of what I'm interested in.
So you guys are ready that on that? It's gonna be research. It's not gonna be.
I like yours. Yeah, I like yours. You can do yours with the issue and like how to break it down.
I mean, seniors like I would have senior. I don't have any maps.
That's so funny. Even in Denver, there's so many e-scooter people. It's less here than it is in Denver.
Sure.
But it's more e-scooters. Like everybody uses the stupid e-scooter. It's annoying. So like yeah.
Yeah, today, went out to the school.
Yeah.
Like a long one on the same. Oh, yeah, particularly when I belong.
And you said, hi, can I take 5 minutes of your time?
I have to go to the
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
We're gonna be late.
And just give them touch around for a little bit better, right? Okay. People, we're trying to do X. So what are the problems we're trying to find? Just kind of the best one ever. And also, I guess we're trying to do the issues and problems. So
Yeah, so what I'm gonna do is like, I'm gonna like combine this together. So you can talk about it without the group, see what they talk about. And, like, it's like kind of engaging time.
yeah, I know we one. There's never enough material.
You know what I mean?
Like an abnormal.
Yeah, privacy. Sure.
Like,
That is a big thing. Trust. No, like trust is a big one. That's one thing with being a scientist and trying to trust things. There's a lot of trust when it
Okay. Why is it working on?
often like mapping and all that stuff, or like that kind of stuff, which is not necessarily. It's not.
But it's building off. There should be like, obviously you're asking if you
All right, everybody. Hello? I know you guys are like probably working a little bit. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna merge groups. So I would say join like just two groups to a new group, right? So I would just join the nearest group to yours, basically. I would join the nearest group to yours. What you're gonna do is you're gonna basically like kind of like talk about your pitches now and critique each other's work, basically, and be like, if you were an outside audience, would this be compelling to you? That's something that you would want to hear more about or want to learn more about, basically. So yeah, I would just like get two, like, you know, if a group's near you, just join with that group, basically. So that's gonna go for it. Spend like 5 to 10 minutes just talking through it.
Hi, friends.
It's easier for us to do this.
What's your guys' research? Us too.
Are you guys?
Okay. We have every. We have grading. It's all up.
Yeah, oh, thanks. That's AI and machine learning to like wait, I'll go from the beginning. So there's a bunch of cameras near like the base station that we're gonna use to and try to create like a model using AI to detect like e-bikes and bikes at like intersections and kind of see which intersections are like have more e-bikes, therefore like
And their overall
like
attitudes towards
a lot of people are like worried about
this area, specifically at crosswalks and busy intersections.
What kind of data do you reflect?
So you know how New York has to be a very car-dependent city. Actually,
Yeah, it's really,
it might be more mixed between transit and car-dependent, but still a lot of motor traffic gets through, especially in Manhattan.
We were similar talking.
Also, it's built rather haphazardly. And there are also some places that might not be maintained as well, like some crosswalks might appear rugged.
So here, on street safety.
Another thing to note is that
Right, especially in New York City. New York City is really that perfect. I was ready to they're going to make sure that the city is accessible to everyone.
Adjusted and
We need to think of the broader issue and why people can just keep from actually people are not playing and inside because it's cooler and it's not hot. And we don't want people to only go outside for necessity things like market stuff. They should be able to go out.
Cross street and they want cars drive in that direction.
I didn't get everybody in. Okay. Right.
So that was a very hard.
as a potential side effect, longer light cycles from pedestrians might mean greater amount of traffic on the cross street. So that can probably increase the stress level. If you've all seen what happens with congestion pricing, like the MTA got sued for that it will cost back up to their home state because nobody wants to drive along the
And I think we're like doing a bunch of research.
Extend the life cycle so long, or perhaps like keep the life cycles the way they are, like
Get maps of where the link is, and then giving that data to policymakers or
New Yorkers for advanced years point by picking a solution that would detect that and extend the life cycle specifically for them.
Yeah, we're gonna be late on this.
Hey, everybody. I know you guys have been talking a little bit. I'm going to try to keep everything roughly on time. So, does any combined group want to talk about what you guys been talking about, like what your ideas were, what your pitches were like, what you thought was compelling?
Yeah, we'll talk about it. I'll be okay with that, Mike.
Cool.
It's not my research, but I've been educated by the experts. And one of the things that we collectively are looking into is how to make sidewalks, crosswalks, and overall walking around New York City, specifically in Harlem, less of a challenge for the elderly. It's a very congested city. There's a lot of car traffic. There's a lot of issues. And so these folks have been walking around interviewing people and doing novel research, asking them what they're missing from their daily commute. Maybe making the crosswalk light longer, making other adaptations to the transport would make lives easier for the elderly. This is important, obviously, because hopefully there's always going to be old people. And the specific audience that is particularly interested in this would happen to be the elderly as well, along with the people who love the elderly.
It should be all of us. Awesome. Did you guys like listen to their side too, like their pitch as well, or?
We basically had the same project.
Anyone else want to share before we move on? Cool. Okay. Yes, no. Oh.
We have the same problem, but I think the reason that we said it was relevant was because of the current heat wave. We should pay attention to it because a lot of older people are then forced to kind of be inside because they don't, there's not like safe ways for them to like necessarily be outside if it's so hot. So maybe having like more parks with more shade or just other ways they can move around that maybe wouldn't be as exposed to the current weather.
How to cool down the elderly.
So it feels like the general audience here is the elderly, which is good. So it's like how they can get around, but also how to keep them safe from the weather, which is also very good. So this is cool. And I think also pretty easy to convince people this matters. So that's great. So hopefully you guys found that like helpful to think about how you guys communicate things that you think are like difficult to communicate or just meaningful. So I'm just gonna like briefly and like go through this before we close out. Ideally, many of you will like are scientists, working to be scientists will be in the future. So at some point, people will ask you about what you're doing, and you will talk to them and have to tell them what you're doing, communicate with them as like a source for an article, interview, whatever you might want to do. And I just want to tell you things that I think are important from the other side of the curtain, which is like interviewing you. Like ask them questions about like what they're working on, basically. So for example, like who else are they speaking to, right? So like for example, if I'm talking about what I talk like research on, and the person's I'm interviewing me is interviewing climate skeptics, I might have questions about what they're working on, which is important to think about, right? Also, how long is what they're working on, story length, time, whatever, because that tells you how much of what you say will be in it. Because if they have 500 words, your hour-long conversation is going to be a small part of that. I find a lot of people get upset when they're like, "Oh, I spoke to someone for an hour," and that's like a little bite of that. But that's okay. You can still use it as a time to educate them on what you're doing. Yeah, like when's it being published? Sometimes people will interview or ask you questions months away from what they're doing, and wait until it's actually like going to be meaningful for audiences to listen to or read or watch, or just like, issues bills in Congress, for example. As a source, you can just be a teacher or someone, like some people may just talk to you to learn about a topic, and it might just inform how they then continue their own work, which is really important too. So like you might make a friend, you might make like a mentor, someone you work with. Like these are all important things to do. And in doing that, you want to break your research down to like the bare bones, because sometimes they'll know, sometimes they won't know. So you want to really like keep that in mind. And it just makes whatever they're working on more accurate, which is good for us as people who want to be scientists one day. And yeah, and also you want to build relationships with people, right? Some people will keep coming to you over the course of your career, and that means that that they know things. That's also important because then you trust them to convey it properly. So these things just keep in mind. And it's like I'll leave this here for a little bit. These are some resources that you might want to look at. There's books in science communication. This is a great one. Like this one has interviews from scientists, from writers, from a bunch of different people. Siri Carpenter is a science reporter. She's really good at what she does. There's like media trainings too. Metcalf Institute has one. AAAS has one. Compass, which is like you start from like the message box. They have a whole media like training, science communication, like just apparatus if people are interested in that. For those who are grad students, ComSciCon is great. It's like a conference for science communication for grad students and postdocs. So if you're interested in that, it's like really good thing to get into. That's also great. And then if you want to like do writing like I do, there's conferences for that as well. So just like things to just keep in mind. I'll have time for questions later. And just acknowledgements since we're ending up. So I just want to keep on time. I have two research groups that I really heavy work with. Shui Chen's group and Abby Swan's group have been really helpful with us, just like, and Laura's here. Yeah, Laura's also in Abby's group. Really helpful for me, like as a scientist, and I just like have mentorship in those places. I also want to thank Kat Hybers, who I TA'd with this past year, and I feel like TAing was really helpful for thinking about how to communicate to people who aren't scientists was really helpful because you can meet people who are like undergrads, which is really nice. And then just, acknowledgements for places I've written for that helped me as a writer communicator. Ultimate Comic Scientists is a really good one. They do great work for science broadly. Social Journalism Network is also great if you want to think about how to make a lot of like earth science stuff now seems pretty bleak, like really sad. They're really invested in how do you make it less sad, how do you make people invested in the happy stories, but I think there are still those. New Comic Coalition also similarly is invested in that kind of work as well. And the Uproot Project, which I'm a part of, they're like a network of writers of color who write about the environment. And it's a really good way to get a lot of these like climate issues hit this nexus of like people who are marginalized at the hardest. So having people in that space who knows communities well is a great place to be a part of. So with that, here's like a little QR code for feedback if you have questions or like comments, but also if I have questions. So yeah, thank you guys.